Stop moaning, or you'll wake the rest of the station, she said in a low, melodic hum. The voice belonged to a figure half hidden in shadows, leaning close to the bunk where he slept. Her silhouette was tall, draped in a thin cloak that glowed at the edges in the faint emergency lights. A pair of luminous filaments extended from the back of her head, flickering with a faint violet sheen. Her bright eyes peered into his half-conscious face, curiosity etched into every line of her graceful features. He jerked awake at the sound of her voice, heart thudding, the ghostly remnants of his nightmare still clinging to his thoughts. He tried to yank the scratchy blanket over his chest and realized only too late how intimately she was studying him, her gaze so intent it made his cheeks burn. He sat up and tried to shake off the fragments of the dream that had caused him to moan. I didn't think anyone could hear," he said, voice still raw with sleep. His name was Alvis, though he rarely bothered to introduce himself on these rough fringe outposts. He was a pilot, a wanderer really, doing odd jobs for scraps of pay. Tonight he'd been stuck on this derelict station, drifting near the edge of a half-terraformed moon, all because an engine coil malfunction had forced him to dock here unexpectedly. He only remembered stumbling into a bunk room at some point during the station's night cycle, exhausted and unwilling to pay for the premium quarters. But apparently his moans in the grip of nightmares had attracted attention. She leaned in a fraction closer, revealing that the scaled edges of her cheeks were faintly luminescent, too, like a hidden pattern of stars beneath her skin. I hear everything, she said softly, that voice almost a purr. All these empty corridors, they carry sound. And yours was particularly expressive. She lifted a slender hand and, with the tip of one gently curved fingernail, touched a trembling droplet of sweat that had gathered at his brow. He tried not to flinch, unsure if he should be alarmed or intrigued. Something about her presence made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end, not in fear, but in charged awareness. The silence stretched until he noticed the flicker of her filaments again. They glowed brighter, as though picking up some shift in the atmosphere between them. Are you here alone? He asked quietly. She nodded, though it was more of a tilt of her head, a graceful movement that made the half-light shimmer across her scales. I guess that makes two of us, he continued. This station isn't exactly the most hospitable place. The corridors smell like stale air. The power's flickering in half the modules. I just needed somewhere to rest while I waited for the coil to get replaced in my ship. She was silent, studying him. The question shone in her gaze. Why was he moaning in his sleep? But she didn't ask it outright. Instead, she moved closer and perched on the edge of his bunk, the mattress sagging beneath her slight weight. He could feel the heat radiating from her. You're human, she observed, her voice still low. Your species is known for vivid dreaming. That's what I've been told. He gave a short, humorless laugh. Maybe so. But I don't think moaning in my dreams is normal, at least for me. Might be these nightmares. I see things I can't fix. People I've lost. Battles I've fought. He didn't want to elaborate on the specifics. War had worn him down. Being stranded between mercenary stints left him with no sense of home, only memories that echoed in his sleep. She seemed to sense he was holding back. But her approach to conversation was gentle, almost teasing. I felt you, she said, through the walls before I heard you. You must dream intensely. Your breathing changed the pulses of the station's failing life support system. The patterns, they startled me. She said it so matter-of-factly that Alvis blinked in confusion. You can sense that? He asked. She shrugged, the filaments at the back of her head swaying delicately. My species is attuned to subsonic frequencies. The beating of a heart, the moan of a drifting ship's engines, the shift of air pressure. We feel all of it. He became aware of his own heartbeat then, a steady pulse that hammered against his ribs. She watched him, and he felt the sheer physicality of the moment. He was shirtless, wearing only a rumpled pair of cargo pants, and she was so close he could count every faint scale along the ridge of her collarbone. He realized that her presence made him self-conscious, but not in a bad way, more in a primal, surprising way that stirred something inside him. She touched the side of his face, her touch strangely cool. "Is that why you came here alone?" she asked. "Because you have nowhere else that feels safe?" His breath caught. He wanted to bark out some denial, some flippant comment about being a free spirit who roamed the galaxy at will. But the truth stuck like a stone in his throat. "Maybe," he admitted. "I've been drifting for a while now. This was supposed to be a quick repair stop." The mention of it sounded hollow, as if even he didn't believe it was just a quick pit stop. She didn't press him, only studied him in the faint light. Outside the bunk area, something hissed, ancient hydraulics misfiring. The emergency lights flickered. Her filaments flared in response, brightening enough to reveal a hint of color swirling under her skin, as though her blood glowed in shifting patterns. Alvis realized he was staring. She half smiled, not offended but seemingly pleased by his reaction. "I'm alone here too," she said softly. "I have business on the station. Or I did. I'm not sure it matters anymore. The ones I came to meet have disappeared." She sounded sad, and there was a tension in her posture that spoke of deeper worries. "I came from my homeworld at great risk. Something about an ancient ceremonial relic that was stolen. I was tracking it. Now I find the contact is gone, and I'm left on a failing station with no leads." He wanted to ask more but sensed it was a painful subject. Instead, he offered something of himself. "I used to be a soldier. The nightmares that make me moan, they're from that time. I lost a lot of people. You'd think I'd get used to it, but sometimes it all just comes back in my dreams. It's embarrassing, especially if I'm in a communal bunk." Her gaze softened. "It's not embarrassing to feel. We all carry ghosts. Some of us keep them hidden, but they make themselves known, eventually." He wondered if her species had something akin to war, or if she was referencing personal loss. She was exotic in every sense, the faint luminescence, the webbing between her slender fingers, the gentle ridges at her temples. But there was a universal pain in her eyes that told him she understood sorrow. "You said my moaning woke you?" he ventured. "Were you trying to rest too?" She shook her head. "I rarely sleep. Not in the way you do. My rest is more of a trance. But I do feel drawn to certain energies. And yours, well, it was strong. It pulled me here before I knew what I was doing." Her words struck a chord. This station was a relic of some old corporate enterprise that had gone bust decades ago. It was barely functional, inhabited mostly by scavengers, mercenaries, and outlaws looking for a place to hide. Yet somehow, in this rusted tomb, they had found each other in a bunk corridor that smelled of stale sweat and old metal. He didn't know her name, but he felt like he was revealing a piece of his soul to her. "I'm Elvis," he said at last. "I figure if we're going to keep surprising each other in the night, I should at least tell you that much." Her lips curved. "Saras," she replied, and the name had a soft rolling sound that felt like water lapping at a shore. "Your moans reminded me of something we do when we're in distress." I was concerned. A wry smile touched his lips. "Concerned or curious?" She let out a small laugh, quiet but genuine. "Both." Then she leaned in, just enough for him to see the shifting colors in her eyes. "I admit your kind intrigues me. Humans are so physically expressive. You moan when you dream, you cry out when you're wounded. My people tend to keep such reactions inward, to maintain composure." He was captivated by the subtle invitation in her tone. He felt an unspoken promise that if he reached for her, she wouldn't pull away. The closeness, the alien perfume that clung to her, the faint glimmer of scales, it all acted like a gravitational field, pulling him into her orbit. "You might find we're even more expressive when we're awake," he murmured. Her pupils widened slightly, and the glow along her filaments intensified. But she didn't close the distance. Instead, she pulled back with a soft murmur, as if reminding herself of some boundary. "I'm staying in a cargo hold that's been converted into temporary quarters," she said. "It's quiet there, better for my senses. If you want to talk more, or if you need help with these nightmares, you can come find me." She trailed her fingertips along the edge of his blanket, then stood, her filaments trailing after her like living braids of light. He watched her leave, noticing the regal set of her shoulders. It felt like a tangible loss when she was gone, as though the corridor's dull lighting swallowed her up. Only then did he realize how thick the silence was without her presence. Alvis exhaled, forcing himself to lie back on the bunk. But rest wouldn't come. His mind churned with too many questions about her, about the relic she was seeking, about why she was exiled here alone. And he couldn't shake how alive he'd felt, even while half asleep, when she'd been near. He tried to doze, but every time he drifted into the threshold of unconsciousness, he remembered the warm press of her hand against his forehead, the faint brush of scales when she touched him. He moaned again, not from fear this time, but from the hungry swirl of thoughts that wouldn't let him go. He tossed in bed, until at last he swung his legs over the bunk and stood up. He pulled on a simple shirt, well-worn and smelling faintly of engine grease, then shoved his feet into boots. He couldn't rest, so he might as well explore. Maybe he could find her cargo hold. As he left the bunk area, each step echoed in the deserted hallway. The station's hum vibrated through his bones. Faulty lights flickered overhead. Shadows played in the corners. Her words kept replaying in his mind, "If you need help with these nightmares, you can come find me." Something in him yearned for that kind of comfort, or at least that kind of closeness. He had no illusions about how fragile connections could be, but she made him want to trust again, if only for a night. He followed the corridor until it curved around a docking bay. The motion sensor lights sputtered to life, illuminating a wide chamber lined with crates, netting, and half-disassembled machinery. There was a raised platform in the center where two men were haggling over a battered mechanical part. Alvis stepped past them, ignoring the suspicious glances. He looked around, scanning for some sign of her presence, but saw only the usual rogues. His ship's docking berth was on the far side of the station, but he wasn't headed there. Not yet. Instead, he turned into a narrower walkway. He felt foolish hunting for someone he'd only just met, but the more he thought about it, the more he felt a compulsion to see her again. A sudden clang stopped him in his tracks. Two scavengers emerged from a side room, both armed, both glaring. Alvis tensed. He was unarmed except for a small utility blade in his boot. He cursed his own carelessness. "You lost?" one of them demanded, thick arms crossed over a stained vest. "This area's restricted. Boss's orders." Alvis tried not to roll his eyes. "Didn't realize there was a boss here. Everyone just does their own thing, far as I know." The second scavenger sneered. "Well, you know now. Turn around, pilot." He recognized the type, station bullies looking to extort a fee. But he had no intention of paying or backing down. "I'm just looking for someone," he said flatly. "She's tall, scales on her arms, luminous filaments." The men glanced at each other. "You mean the weird woman? She's not supposed to be here. She owes tribute. If she can't pay, we'll take it in trade." Alvis's gut twisted with anger. "Where is she?" he demanded. The bullies stepped forward, brandishing their weapons. "Who's asking?" one spat. Alvis weighed his chances. He had no patience for intimidation. The moment they advanced, he sidestepped, aiming a sharp elbow into the side of one man's head. The blow landed with a crack, sending the scavenger stumbling. The other swung a steel bar. Alvis dropped low, the bar whooshing overhead. He sprang up and jabbed his fist into the man's throat, forcing him to cough and stagger. A moment later, the first scavenger lunged again, but Alvis was already pivoting, hooking a leg behind the man's knee and driving him to the floor. The station's corridor rang with curses. One of them fumbled for a communicator, possibly to call reinforcements. Alvis cursed under his breath and delivered a swift kick, sending the communicator skittering across the floor. He stood there panting, glaring at the two men who groaned at his feet. "Stay out of my way," he snapped. "I don't need any more trouble." But trouble had a habit of finding him. He hurried down the corridor, glancing over his shoulder to ensure no one else followed. At the next intersection, he paused to orient himself. This part of the station was half collapsed, the walls blackened by some old electrical fire. Loose wires dangled from open panels, crackling ominously. He stepped around debris, not sure what compelled him to keep searching. Yet something about Saras's presence was too magnetic to ignore. His instincts told him she was near. The corridor opened into an old cargo bay, half blocked by stacked crates that formed a makeshift dwelling of sorts. A faint glow caught his eye. He recognized the distinctive violet hue of her filaments. She was seated atop a stack of crates, slender legs folded under her, a tattered piece of cloth in her hands. She looked up, startled. "Alvis," she said softly, as if she couldn't decide whether she was pleased or worried. "You followed me." He shrugged, catching his breath. "I ran into some trouble. Might have more on the way." She sighed, her filaments dimming slightly. "This station is riddled with those who prey on the vulnerable. I'm sorry you had to fight. That was meant for me." He frowned, stepping closer. "They said you owe tribute. You don't strike me as someone who takes kindly to threats." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "I don't. But I've also learned when to keep my head down. I'm searching for something that belongs to my people, and I can't afford to draw too much attention." He felt a flare of protectiveness, an odd sensation for someone who'd spent so long only looking after himself. "Let me help," he said, surprising even himself. "If you think those two are going to leave you alone, you're wrong. They'll come back with friends." She studied him, eyes reflecting that subtle glow. "You're an outsider here, too. Why would you risk yourself?" He shrugged again. "Good question. Maybe because I'm sick of turning a blind eye. I've done enough of that in my life. And maybe I owe you for your concern earlier." She tilted her head, considering. Then she nodded, setting aside the cloth. "There's a place deeper in the station, near the old communications array, that's abandoned. It might be safer. We can barricade ourselves until the next station cycle, then slip away unnoticed. Or you can return to your ship. No sense risking yourself for me." He shook his head. "I'm not leaving you to face them alone." Her eyes flickered with appreciation. She hopped down from the crates, landing lightly on her feet. He could see now that the scales on her arms formed intricate patterns that rose toward her shoulders, shimmering with her every breath. They began to navigate the labyrinth of corridors together. The tension was palpable, the failing station lighting casting their shadows in tall, distorted shapes on the walls. Every so often, he glanced over at her to confirm she was keeping pace, only to find her returning his look with quiet intensity. A heated undercurrent thrummed between them, accentuated by the memory of her soft touch in the bunk room. In the midst of potential danger, he found himself more attuned to her presence than any threat. It was reckless, perhaps, but something about her drew him in. Maybe it was the gentle nature beneath her poised exterior, or the glow that hinted at depths unseen. They passed a corridor where an ancient sign read, "Employee Lounge," with an arrow pointing to a sealed door. Saras paused, pressing a hand to the door's worn surface. "Let's rest here for a moment," she suggested. Alvis warily eyed the door. "No telling what's inside," he said. She placed her other hand on a flickering panel beside it, closed her eyes, and seemed to concentrate. The filaments on her head brightened, their color shifting to a pale turquoise. "There's no one living behind it," she said finally. "Power is minimal. But I think we can get inside if we try." Alvis found an emergency lever, straining until the door screeched open. The air that spilled out was thick, stale, and tinged with the smell of long-discarded food. He coughed, and Saras lifted a hand to her nose, though her expression remained resolute. Inside, the lounge was cramped, scattered with overturned chairs and tables. A layer of dust coated everything. A single overhead light flickered, giving the room a haunted feel. But it was quiet, and there was a door that could be locked. They stepped in and shut the door behind them. Alvis locked it by sliding a thick metal bar into place. A small vent overhead wheezed, providing some ventilation. He turned to Saras, who was surveying the area. "This should do for an hour or so," she murmured. Then she looked at him, and in that dim light, with the door shut, an intimate hush fell over them. She reached out tentatively and ran her fingers along his jaw, as if verifying he was truly there. Your heartbeat is fast, she observed. Are you frightened? He let out a ragged sigh. Not exactly frightened. More on edge. She slipped closer, the glow of her filaments illuminating the space between them. Her presence was calming in a way, yet also stirred him. The contradictory sensation made him want to close his eyes and let her energy wash over him. I can sense it, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. You have so many wounds inside, so many memories that haunt you. I'd like to help ease them, if you'll let me. He swallowed hard, never expecting such an offer. How could you ease them? He asked. She answered by resting her palm against his chest, where his heart thumped. She inhaled slowly, and the glow beneath her skin pulsed, matching his rhythm. There is a practice among my people, she said. A resonance we share when one is burdened. We connect through our senses, letting the other's rhythms become our own. It helps soothe the mind, sometimes even chase away nightmares. She looked into his eyes, and her expression was earnest. But it's intimate, she added, almost apologetically. I don't want to intrude unless you're sure. He felt her warmth, her unique energy, and for a moment, the memory of her leaning over him in the bunk came rushing back, the way she'd touched his brow, the concern in her gaze. This was no random overture. This was something deeply important in her culture, a form of comfort, maybe even a bond. He found himself nodding, despite every defense he'd built over years of loneliness. I trust you, he said, voice low. Her lips parted, and she drew closer. The tips of their noses almost touched. He stood still as she tilted her head, letting her filaments drape lightly over his shoulder. Then she placed her other hand gently on the side of his neck. He could feel a gentle thrumming, like the purr of a distant engine, emanating from her. Or maybe it was from both of them, a joint vibration that built in the space between their bodies. At first, it was simply a comforting warmth. But soon, he felt his heartbeat syncing with hers. His ragged breathing smoothed out, and the tension in his muscles eased. The swirling fear that had kept him restless began to recede, replaced by a subdued calm. He felt an electric hum of desire, too, because she was so close, and her presence was so clearly potent. She noticed it, he was sure, because her pupils dilated and her filaments brightened. Yet she kept her touch gentle, not pushing for more. This was about reassurance, about the quiet moment of shared vulnerability in a dusty abandoned lounge. His nightmares seemed far away now. For several long breaths, they stood like that, eyes closed, leaning into each other, letting a silent current flow between them. He became hyper-aware of the rise and fall of her chest, the soft hiss of air in and out of her slightly parted lips, the faint shimmer of scales along her arms. He inhaled the alien scent of her skin, something like morning dew and distant flowers. He couldn't recall the last time he felt this at peace. Eventually she drew back slightly, though her hands remained on him. Does it help? She asked, her voice quiet. He opened his eyes, meeting her luminous gaze. Yes, he murmured. It does. I don't know how, but it's like you chased away the echoes in my mind, at least for now. She nodded, relief softening her features. I'm glad. I could feel them gnawing at you, these old regrets, old shames. I don't mean to intrude, but it's like standing at the edge of a storm. The thunder is inside you. He let out a shaky breath. You're not intruding, he said. If anything, I'm grateful. And maybe I can offer you something in return. I know you're here for a relic. If there's a way to help you get it back, I will. My ship might not be top of the line, but if we can track down your contact or find some lead, we can leave this station behind. Her eyes lit up at the suggestion, though a shadow of doubt passed across her face. You'd really risk that? You barely know me. He smiled grimly. I've risked my life for far less noble causes. Right now, it just feels right to do something that matters. And it matters to you, doesn't it? She hesitated, then nodded. It matters greatly. The relic is part of a cultural heritage. Our ceremonies revolve around it. It was stolen by a group of smugglers allied with slavers, I believe. My mission was to intercept it before they could sell it on the black market. But I was betrayed by the very contact who promised me information. Now I'm stranded here. My clan doesn't know. I can't return without it." He squeezed her hand in quiet sympathy. "Then let's figure this out. Just tell me how we can find a lead." She exhaled, stepping away at last to rummage through the pockets of her cloak. She produced a small device, a data wafer with ancient script etched on it. "This wafer supposedly reveals the tracking code for the relic's container if I can power it up. But the station's systems are so broken, and the locals want bribes I can't afford." Alvis took it from her gently, studying its shape. "My ship has a half-decent NAV computer. We can try hooking it up and see if it'll run the power to read this. Then we just follow the code if it's still broadcasting." A glimmer of hope dawned in her eyes, but it was tempered by caution. "The slavers might still be near. They have ways of tracking me. If we fail, or if they intercept us, we won't live to see another sunrise." Her voice wavered slightly. He pressed the wafer back into her hands, meeting her gaze. "Then we don't fail. We'll be careful. But for now, we should rest. You said we can hide until the station's cycle changes. That should buy us time to slip back to my ship." She nodded, and an awkward silence stretched between them, weighted by the mixture of tension and trust blooming in the cramped lounge. He noticed the barest flicker of vulnerability in her eyes, something that mirrored his own longing. They had shared an intimate resonance, but only for a moment. He found himself craving more of that closeness, yet it felt too soon, too uncertain. She must have sensed the conflict in him. She lowered her gaze and stepped to a corner of the lounge, sliding to the floor with her back against the wall. She motioned for him to sit beside her. He settled down, wincing as his spine adjusted to the hard surface. Without any fanfare, she leaned her head on his shoulder, her filaments draping softly across his arm. The gentle weight of her was unexpectedly soothing. He draped one arm around her, letting his hand rest lightly on her upper arm. They sat that way, listening to the distant groans of the station's infrastructure. For a while either spoke. Alvis felt strangely content, even though danger lurked beyond the door, even though there were scavengers who might be regrouping to corner them again. The hush between them was fragile, a moment of peace in the chaos. Eventually he felt her shudder. "You're trembling," he murmured, concerned. She laughed softly, a rueful sound. "I'm not trembling. My body is adjusting to your presence, matching your warmth. Our physiologies are quite different. I suppose you could call it a side effect of the resonance." She looked up at him, her eyes shining in the flickering light. "Your dreams must be intense," she added. "I keep sensing echoes of them, like a faint hum in the distance." He sighed, brushing a hand through her filaments almost unconsciously. They were surprisingly soft, like gossamer threads. "They are. It's been that way since the war. Faces I can't forget, missions that went wrong. They pile up, and sometimes I moan, cry out, do all sorts of embarrassing things in my sleep. You might regret telling me to come find you." She shook her head, filaments caressing his fingers. "No. I want to learn about your dreams. And if they make you moan, maybe I can learn to soothe you so that those moans aren't from pain or terror." Her voice was so honest it took his breath away. He felt a stirring, a deep warmth low in his belly, a wave of longing that lapped at the edges of his caution. She had a sensual magnetism that went beyond mere appearance. It was in the way she cared, the way she sensed emotions and offered solace. He bent his head close to hers, not quite kissing, but close enough that he could feel the ghost of her breath. "You're already soothing me," he whispered. She sighed contentedly and closed her eyes. They stayed like that, on the cold metal floor, letting the station's flickers lull them into a semblance of rest. The nightmares receded, replaced by the hum of her presence. And though they both knew danger lurked outside, for now, in this stolen moment, they found a strange kind of safety in each other's arms. When he finally drifted off, he did not moan. Instead, Saras listened to the gentle rhythm of his breathing, her filaments twining with his hair. She could sense the shift in his subconscious, a calmer tide sweeping through him. She wondered if this was what it felt like to bond, to share vulnerability in a way that transcended cultural divides. She let the question linger in her thoughts as she too drifted into a quiet state of half-trance, lulled by the steady heartbeat beneath her cheek. He awoke to the sound of distant shouting and the harsh clang of metal hitting metal. The overhead light flickered violently, casting a strobe effect across the room. Saras jerked upright, her filaments snapping to alert. "They've found us," she whispered. Alvis gritted his teeth and rose, pressing an ear to the door. He heard footsteps pounding in the corridor and voices barking orders. Someone rattled the door handle. A sharp blow reverberated through the metal, making it shudder. Saras scrambled to her feet, eyes wide. "We need another exit," she hissed. Alvis glanced around the lounge, heart hammering. The only other door was a maintenance hatch, half hidden behind an overturned table. He hurried over, throwing aside the debris. "Help me," he said, gesturing to the hatch's rusted wheel. Saras joined him, and together they strained to turn the wheel until it screeched. The door popped open, revealing a cramped tunnel that disappeared into darkness. "Go," he ordered. She slid inside without argument. He followed, pulling the hatch shut behind them just as the main door began to cave under repeated blows. They crawled through the narrow maintenance shaft, the stale air thick with dust and the scent of decaying wires. The occasional spark lit the darkness, reflecting off Saras's scales and filaments as she led the way. They heard muffled shouts behind them, but the station's labyrinthine layout worked in their favor. The shaft ended in a vertical drop. Alvis peered down. "It's about 10 feet," he said, wincing. "We can climb if we're careful." Saras nodded and began her descent, bracing her slender limbs against the shaft's sides. Alvis followed, doing his best not to slip on the rust. They landed in another corridor, this one even more dilapidated, with blinking emergency panels and half-collapsed ceilings. "This way," he said, referencing a mental map of the station he'd studied earlier. If they could make it to the west dock, they might circle back to his ship unseen. They walked in tense silence, ears straining for pursuers, hearts pounding in unison. Finally, the corridor opened into a wide docking bay that was mostly deserted. A single light near the airlock flickered, illuminating a battered sign, Bay 7. Alvis allowed himself a tight smile. "My ship's in Bay 9, he said. "If we can cross this area, we're almost there." But crossing would mean open ground, with little to no cover. They exchanged a look, acknowledging the risk. Then, in silent agreement, they took off at a brisk jog, sticking to the shadows as best they could. They were halfway across when a loud shout rang out. At least 4 armed figures emerged from behind a row of cargo containers. One of them was a scarred man with a patch over his left eye, brandishing a pulse rifle. "Stop right there!" he bellowed. Saras froze, filaments flaring in alarm. Alvis scanned for a route to evade, but the men were fanning out, trying to box them in. "We just need to get to our ship," Alvis said, raising his hands, hoping to avoid a firefight. "We're not looking for trouble," the scarred man spat. "Too late for that. We heard about the fight in the corridors. Rumor is you attacked our associates. And you're harboring that scaled woman who hasn't paid her dues." Alvis's mind raced. These men were likely part of the same gang. "We didn't start anything," Alvis snapped. "But we'll finish it if we have to," the man sneered. "You talk big for someone outnumbered. Hand over the woman, and we might let you crawl away." Saras bristled beside him, her body language shifting from tense to something more predatory. She drew herself up to her full height, eyes glowing. "I am not yours to hand over," she said, voice ringing with quiet fury. The men exchanged glances, seeming unsettled by her presence. The one with the patch raised his rifle, but Alvis was already in motion. He lunged forward, grabbing a discarded piece of metal plating from a pile of junk. He used it as a makeshift shield, deflecting the man's first shot. The pulse blast ricocheted, scorching a nearby crate. Saras darted behind a container, pressing her back to the metal as 2 other thugs began firing. Sparks and bolts of energy lit up the bay, the acrid scent of burned metal filling the air. Alvis ducked behind a crate, adrenaline surging. He had no firearm, only the blade in his boot. Could he close the distance and disarm them? He exchanged a quick look with Saras. She nodded, as if reading his mind. He leapt out from behind the crate, weaving erratically as another shot whizzed past his shoulder. The men cursed and tried to track him, but Alvis covered ground with surprising speed, thanks to old training. He slid across the floor, taking out a thug's legs. The rifle clattered to the ground. Alvis slammed an elbow into the man's jaw, knocking him cold. Another swung a baton, striking Alvis's ribs. Pain flared, but Alvis gritted his teeth and twisted free, bringing up his boot knife in a swift slash. The baton wielder yelped and staggered back, clutching a gash in his forearm. Meanwhile, Saras emerged from cover with a fluid grace that took the men by surprise. She grabbed the baton wielder's wrist, her scales flaring bright. With a pivot, she used his own momentum to slam him into a wall. Alvis had never seen such agility. 1 minute she was a comforting presence, the next she was all lethal elegance. Patchai roared, leveling his rifle at Saras. Alvis threw himself forward, hooking an arm around the man's weapon and yanking it upward. The shot went wide, striking the ceiling and raining sparks down on them. The two struggled, grappling for control of the rifle. Patchai was strong, but Alvis had desperation on his side. He drove a knee into the man's gut, wrenching the rifle away. Before Patchai could recover, Saras was there, planting a swift, precise blow to his neck. He collapsed to the floor, wheezing and disarmed. The last thug standing tried to flee, but Saras aimed the rifle, her hands shaking slightly. Alvis gently lowered it for her. "He's running!" "Let him," he said. She nodded, letting out a trembling breath. The fight was over, but the pounding in Alvis's chest hadn't calmed. He met Saras's gaze, and for a moment, the rest of the station seemed to melt away. She was alive, and so was he, both of them vibrating with leftover adrenaline. "Come on," he urged. "We need to get to my ship before more arrive." She agreed, and together they sprinted across the remaining stretch of the docking bay, weaving between crates and fallen bodies. Bay 8 loomed on their left, then Bay 9. Alvis quickly keyed his code into the access panel. The lock hissed open, revealing a small docking tunnel that led to his ship. It wasn't much to look at, a patchwork vessel with mismatched panels, but it had carried him through countless dangers. They rushed inside, sealing the airlock behind them. Alvis hurried to the cockpit and began powering up the systems. The engines hummed to life, the lights flickering. Saras glanced around, eyes wide with curiosity. "It's cozy," she ventured. He gave a short laugh. "Cozy is a polite way of saying cramped, but it's home. And hopefully it'll get us out of here safely." She ran a hand along the console, seeming to marvel at the technology. "Where's your NAV computer?" He pointed to a battered unit mounted on the dash. She slipped beside him in the pilot's seat, producing the data wafer. Their arms brushed, sparking that same jolt of awareness. "Let's see if this works," he said. He slid open a small panel, revealing an access slot. Saras carefully inserted the wafer. The screen flickered, lines of alien script scrolling across it. Alvis toggled a switch, powering additional circuits. The lines resolved into partial coordinates. Saras held her breath. "That's it," she whispered. "Coordinates for the container that holds the relic. It's not far from here. Possibly on the surface of the moon below." Alvis's brow furrowed. "We need to verify if there's a transponder signal. If it's on the moon's surface, it might be in the hands of whoever bought it. Could be the slavers. We'll have to be careful." She glanced at him, determination lighting her face. "I'm ready to face danger if it means reclaiming what was stolen. My clan's traditions depend on that relic." He believed her. Her quiet intensity told him she'd follow this path no matter the cost. He nodded. "All right, let's not wait for an invitation. We'll break free of the station's docking clamps and head down to the moon's surface." He powered the engines to full, scanning the console for signs of external interference. The station was old, so hopefully no one would be able to lock them in place. "Brace yourself," he warned. Saras clutched the back of the pilot's seat as he engaged thrusters. The ship vibrated, metal groaning, and then they felt a lurch as the docking clamps released. A dull siren sounded somewhere in the station, but by then they were already drifting free, pivoting away from the battered airlock. Alvis guided the ship through the debris field around the station, teeth clenched. "Looks like they have some turret defenses," he said, eyeing a readout that showed a pair of lasers warming up on the station's exterior. "They're probably controlled by the gang that runs this place. We'll need to outrun them. Hold on." He diverted power to the engines, and the ship shot forward. Bright beams of energy lanced out, scorching space where they'd just been. Saras gasped, pressing a hand to the console for balance. The hull rattled under a near miss. Alvis winced, coaxing every bit of speed from the outdated thrusters. With a final burst of acceleration, they cleared the station's range. The turret fire ceased, leaving them free in the star-speckled void. Saras sagged against the seat, relief playing on her face. "We made it," she breathed, half in disbelief. Alvis gave her a tight smile. "We made it off the station, yeah? Now we just have to land on a hostile moon and hope we're not diving headfirst into a nest of slavers. If you have any second thoughts, now's the time to speak up." She straightened, eyes glowing with renewed resolve. "No second thoughts," she said. "We do what we must." He nodded, understanding that same sense of grim purpose. The star field swung across the cockpit windows as he keyed in the wafer's coordinates. The onboard computer beeped, plotting a course toward the moon below. Through the viewport, they could see the moon's surface, a cracked expanse of rocky plains and jagged hills dotted with the faint twinkle of artificial lights. It was not fully terraformed, there were swirling clouds of chemical haze in the atmosphere. But the wafer's data suggested the relic was on the ground, possibly in some outpost or hidden compound. Alvis set the autopilot to approach orbit, then swiveled to face Saras. "If there's a base down there, we'll need a plan. We can't just storm in guns blazing." She nodded, though a flicker of worry crossed her face. "My plan was always to surprise them, but that was before I lost my contact. Perhaps we can do reconnaissance, see if there's a place we can sneak in, or at least sabotage their systems." He studied her, noticing how exhaustion fought with determination in her eyes. "We'll figure it out. But first, we should rest. Properly this time." Her gaze flicked to the cramped living quarters behind the cockpit. "Your bed?" she asked softly, the suggestion laced with a deeper meaning. He hesitated, heart skipping a beat at the thought of her presence so close. The memory of her resonance, the gentle hum that bound them, ignited a fresh wave of longing. "Yes," he said quietly. "My bed. It's small, but we'll make do." She stood, and he followed her into the rear cabin. It was a tight space, with a bunk that barely fit one person comfortably. Supplies and clothing were shoved into netted compartments on the walls. Saras approached the bunk, running a hand over the worn blanket. "Your ship, your bed," she said. "Are you sure there's room for two?" He reached for her waist, pulling her gently closer. "We'll fit," he said, voice low. She didn't resist. Instead, her arms found their way around his neck, her filaments brushing his shoulders. He felt the warmth of her body pressing close, the rhythmic rise and fall of her breath. A swirl of sensation flooded him, relief, gratitude, desire, and a strange sense of peace that he hadn't known in years. She lifted her face, and he hesitated, unsure if he should kiss her. But the look in her eyes answered his unspoken question. He lowered his head, capturing her lips in a soft, tentative kiss. Her mouth was cool, yielding, a faint electric tingle passing between them. She sighed against his lips, her fingers tangling in his hair. The closeness was dizzying, more intense than anything he felt in a long time. They lingered in that sweet, gentle press of mouths, letting the tension of the recent fight melt away. He slid a hand up to cradle her jaw, feeling the tiny scales at her temple. She leaned into his touch, her body arching slightly against him. When they broke apart, her eyes shone with quiet wonder. "You're kind," she murmured. "You express with your mouths. We do so much with our filaments. But I like this. It feels raw, real." He smiled, pressing a tender kiss to her forehead. "There's more of that if you want," he said gently. She nodded, her filaments gently coiling around his wrist, guiding his hand down to her waist. She seemed both curious and cautious, as though exploring new territory. He let her set the pace, following her silent cues. When their lips met again, there was more urgency, a shared need. The hum of resonance stirred between them, that same comforting current of energy melding with physical desire. Finally, they broke apart to breathe, foreheads resting together. "We should lie down," he said, voice husky. She nodded, letting him guide her onto the bunk. They managed to fit side by side, though it forced them to press closely against each other. He drew the blanket over them, heart pounding at the intimacy of the moment. She wrapped an arm around his torso, resting her head on his shoulder. For a while, they simply breathed in unison, letting the comfort wash over them. Her hand splayed across his chest, tracing idle patterns over the fabric of his shirt. Each brush of her fingers sent tingles down his spine. He responded by running a hand through her filaments, which seemed to fascinate him as much as it did her. They were soft, flexible, pulsing faintly with her heartbeat. When he grazed the base of them, a tremor ran through her body, and she let out a soft, breathy sound. "That tickles," she said, cheeks warming with a blush that tinted her scales a deeper hue. He smiled, taking it slow, exploring the connection that grew between them with every small touch. Her body fit against his in a way that was both alien and achingly right. He found that his nightmares felt distant when he was with her. She must have sensed his gratitude, because she leaned in and pressed a gentle kiss to his throat. "If you moan now," she teased softly, "I'll know it's not from a nightmare." He chuckled, a warm flush spreading across his face. "You might have to find out." The subtle humor gave them both relief. It wasn't just lust, it was a blossoming companionship, a shared vulnerability in an inhospitable galaxy. They stayed entwined, exchanging whispers and careful caresses. It felt like the world outside had paused, giving them room to explore each other's presence. She removed her cloak, revealing more of the shimmering patterns that adorned her arms and collarbone. Alvis trailed a fingertip along the ridges of her scales, marveling at their texture. She shivered, half-lidding her eyes. The unspoken desire simmered between them, but they didn't rush it. It was enough to lie there, chest to chest, feeling each other's warmth and breath, forging a fragile connection in the quiet darkness. When at last exhaustion pulled them under, she tucked her head beneath his chin, and he looped an arm protectively around her. The hum of the ship's engines provided a lullaby of sorts, vibrating through the hull. Alvis let his eyelids drift shut, heart full and mind unexpectedly at peace. This time, when sleep claimed him, his moans never came. Instead, he drifted through dreamless rest, anchored by the comfort of her presence. They awoke hours later to a persistent beeping from the cockpit. Saras stirred first, propping herself up on an elbow to look at Alvis with a sleepy, soft expression. "Your ship is calling," she murmured. He roused, blinking away the fog of slumber. For a moment, he'd forgotten about the relic, the slavers, and the uncertain mission awaiting them. All that existed was her warmth next to him. But reality intruded swiftly. He eased out of the bunk, wincing at a stiff shoulder, and made his way to the cockpit. Saras followed, drawing her cloak around her once more. The NAV computer readout flashed with final approach instructions. They were in stable orbit around the moon, near the coordinates indicated by the wafer. Alvis studied the readouts. "I see a small base, or what's left of it, down on the surface. Could be the place that's holding the container. The atmosphere is thin but breathable with minimal gear." Saras peered over his shoulder, eyes narrowing. "We'll have to land some distance away to avoid detection. Then we approach on foot." Alvis glanced at her, noticing the determined set of her jaw. "You sure you're up for this?" he asked softly. She met his gaze with quiet strength. "I have to be. My people's heritage is at stake." And I've already dragged you this far. He placed a reassuring hand on hers. We're in this together. Let's gear up. We might need to fight our way out again. She nodded, and they began preparations. He lent her some old body armor that could be adjusted to her slim form, though it fit awkwardly over her scaled torso. She accepted it gratefully. He strapped on his sidearm, checking the energy cells. Once they were ready, Alvis guided the ship into a careful descent, the engines vibrating as they cut through the moon's thin atmosphere. Outside the window, the ground rushed closer, an expanse of rocky plains pocked with craters. Far off, they could see the silhouette of a small compound, prefab structures nestled against the ridge. The ship touched down with a jolt. Alvis killed the engines, letting the craft settle into the dust. They lowered the ramp, and a blast of chill air greeted them. Saras inhaled sharply, her filaments pulsing. She seemed to adjust quickly, scanning the horizon. Alvis flicked on a handheld scanner. No immediate life signs around us, he reported. We'll have a mile or two to trek. They set off, boots crunching on the gritty ground. The moon's sky was a murky grayish color, shot through with ribbons of chemical haze. Occasional gusts of wind kicked up swirling dust devils around them. As they drew closer to the compound, they crouched low behind a rocky outcrop to survey the scene. A chain-link fence surrounded the buildings, with a single guarded gate. A pair of armed sentries paced near what looked like a warehouse entrance. Lights glowed in a couple of windows, suggesting power was running. That's probably where they're storing illicit cargo, Saras whispered. The relic might be in there. Alvis nodded. We need a diversion or a stealth approach. If we try direct assault, we'll end up pinned down. Saras furrowed her brow, thinking. If I can get close enough to the warehouse, I might be able to sense the relic's presence. Sometimes it calls out to those of my lineage. But we need to slip past the fence and the guards. Alvis scanned the perimeter. He spotted a section of fence that sagged near some stacked crates. That might be our best bet, he said, pointing it out. Let's loop around to the far side. She agreed, and they began a slow, methodical crawl around the perimeter. The wind bit at their faces, and dust coated their armor. Eventually, they reached the sagging fence. Alvis used wire cutters to snip through, creating a small opening. He gestured for Saras to go first. She slid inside, her movements as quiet as a ghost, then waited for him. They pressed themselves against the crates, just a stone's throw from the warehouse wall. The guards were around the corner, out of immediate sight. Saras closed her eyes, resting one palm against the warehouse metal. Her filaments glowed softly, as though she was reaching out with senses beyond the human scope. After a moment, her eyes snapped open. It's here, she whispered, a note of awe creeping into her voice. I can feel its call. Not strong, but it's definitely close. Possibly in a sealed crate inside. Alvis glanced around for a door or window. He spied a side hatch, partially rusted. Let's try that hatch. We just need to avoid the guards. They crept along the wall, hugging the shadows. The wind rustled overhead cables, creating a low moan that almost masked the sound of their footsteps. At the hatch, Alvis tried the latch and found it locked. He pulled out a small multi-tool, working quickly on the ancient mechanism. His heart thudded in his ears. At any moment, a guard could patrol around the corner. Finally, the latch gave with a click. He slipped inside, Saras following close behind. The interior was dimly lit by overhead lights that buzzed with failing electricity. The space was cluttered with shipping containers and crates, many labeled with questionable corporate logos. The air smelled of dust and machine oil. Saras moved ahead silently, her filaments brightening enough to cast a faint glow on the metal crates. Alvis kept his weapon at the ready. They listened, straining for any sign of guards inside. Low voices echoed from the far side of the warehouse, but they seemed distant. Saras ran her hand over the crates, pausing every so often to concentrate. After a few tense moments, she stopped at a large container partially buried under others. A chain and padlock secured its doors. I feel it, she breathed. The relic is in here. Alvis knelt down, examining the padlock. He could force it with the multi-tool, but it might take time and make noise. He glanced around, spotting a crowbar. That might be faster, but also risk clanging metal. Before he could decide, a sharp voice rang out. "Hey! Who's there?" Footsteps approached, echoing off the walls. Alvis dropped low behind the container, motioning for Saras to hide. She pressed herself against the side, filaments dimming as she tried to remain unseen. A single guard stepped into view, scanning the rows of crates with a flashlight. He was tall, wearing patched armor and carrying a sidearm. Alvis held his breath, waiting for the guard to move on. But the guard took another step closer, eyes narrowing at a faint scuff mark near the container. Alvis tensed, prepared to strike if the guard noticed them. In that moment, Saras's hand found his, gripping tightly. She closed her eyes, and he felt a subtle hum emanate from her, almost like she was directing her resonance outward. The guard hesitated, suddenly blinking and shaking his head. A look of confusion crossed his features, as though he'd forgotten why he was there. Then he turned, muttering to himself, and walked away with sluggish steps. Alvis stared at Saras in awe. "Did you do that?" he whispered. She opened her eyes, looking weary but relieved. "A small push," she explained. "It doesn't always work on other species, but I tried to mask our presence in his senses." Alvis gave her an impressed nod. "Remind me never to cross you," he said with a shaky grin. She smiled back, the tension easing for a moment. Then he returned his attention to the padlock. Time was running short. With care, he inserted a small pick into the lock's mechanism. After a few attempts, there was a satisfying click, and the chain loosened. They gingerly opened the container's doors. Inside, among padded packing material, was a capsule about the size of a large suitcase. It pulsed faintly with a strange glow, reminiscent of Saras's filaments. She reached for it reverently, placing both hands on its surface. A tremor passed through her. "This is it," she whispered, eyes shining. "It holds the ceremonial orb of my people, the one used in our bonding rites. Stolen generations ago, only recently traced to this system." Alvis carefully lifted it, feeling a slight vibration from within. "We need to get it out of here. Let's go before the guard snaps out of whatever you did to him." She nodded, helping him secure the capsule with a strap so he could carry it on his back. The thing was awkwardly heavy, but adrenaline fueled him. They slipped back to the hatch, hearts pounding. Just as they eased it open, an alarm shrieked through the warehouse. Red lights began flashing. Shouts echoed from outside. "Damn it!" Alvis cursed. "They've realized something's up." Saras didn't hesitate. She grabbed his hand, and they sprinted into the night, out of the warehouse and across the yard. Spotlights whirled through the darkness, nearly pinning them at one point. But they pressed on, ducking behind crates and vehicles, eventually reaching the fence where they'd cut the hole. Before they could slip through, a hail of gunfire tore into the crates near them, splintering wood and kicking up dust. They threw themselves flat, exchanging frantic looks. Saras pulled the rifle from her shoulder, one they'd scavenged back on the station. She fired a few shots in return, forcing the attackers to take cover. Alvis scrambled through the fence, then motioned for her to follow. She dived after him, firing over her shoulder. They scrambled away, hearts pounding as bullets whizzed overhead. The capsule rattled on Alvis's back, and he silently prayed it wouldn't get damaged. They put as much distance as they could between themselves and the compound. More shouts rang out, and the rumble of an engine suggested a vehicle was being deployed to chase them. Alvis spotted an outcropping of rocks. "There!" he yelled. They dashed behind the rocks, trying to catch their breath. The night air was razor-sharp in their lungs. Saras peered out, cursing under her breath as a scout vehicle rumbled out of the compound, its spotlights sweeping the plains. "We need to draw them away from the ship," Alvis said, mind racing. "If we head straight there, they'll see us board and blow us to bits." Saras's gaze flicked to the horizon. "We could circle around, use the terrain to hide our approach." The rumble of the vehicle grew closer, and they shrank down. Alvis knew they had limited time. Let's do it. But keep low and stay out of the spotlight. They began a wide arc, moving from rock to rock, trying to stay hidden. The vehicle's searchlights scoured the plain, but the swirling dust and the uneven terrain worked in their favor. At one point, the engine revved, and the light passed directly overhead, missing them by a scant few feet. Saras clutched Alvis's hand, her breathing ragged. He squeezed back, his heart pounding so hard he felt it in his temples. The danger was real, but the adrenaline bound them together, forging a powerful sense of unity. After what felt like an eternity, they glimpsed the ship in the distance, a dark silhouette crouched on the dusty ground. Alvis swallowed hard, adjusting the weight of the capsule on his back. "We run for it," he said. "If they see us, we'll fight them off at the boarding ramp." Saras nodded, checking the charge on her rifle. They exchanged a final glance, resolve shining in their eyes, then broke cover, sprinting as fast as they could across the open ground. The vehicle roared behind them, spotting them at last. Gunfire lit the night, bullets kicking up dust near their feet. Alvis felt a searing pain graze his shoulder, but he kept going, teeth gritted. The ramp to the ship was only a few dozen yards away. Saras fired behind them, hitting the vehicle's fender with a shower of sparks. It swerved, giving them precious seconds. They dashed up the ramp, nearly collapsing inside. Alvis slammed the controls, and the ramp rose, sealing shut. Saras rushed to the cockpit, powering up the engines. He stumbled after her, ignoring the blood trickling down his arm. "Get us airborne," he gasped. She was already flipping switches. The ship shuddered, turbines whirring. Outside, the vehicle's gunfire pinged off the hull. A moment later, the craft lifted, dust swirling in a violent cloud beneath them. They lurched into the sky, the hull rattling under a few last desperate shots. Then they soared away, leaving the compound's floodlights behind. Saras exhaled a shaky laugh, relief flooding her face. Alvis slumped into the co-pilot's seat, cradling his wounded shoulder. "We got it," he panted, feeling a wild surge of triumph. "We actually got it." Saras turned to him, her eyes shining with gratitude and something deeper. "I can't thank you enough," she said. "You risked everything for me, for my people's treasure." He managed a crooked smile. "We're not out of danger yet. That was the easy part." She reached over, her fingers brushing his cheek. "It means more to me than you'll ever know," she whispered. He leaned into her touch, ignoring the pain in his shoulder for a moment. "I think I'm beginning to understand," he murmured. They were safe, for now, drifting above the moon's surface. The cargo was secured, the relic in their possession. But Alvis knew they weren't done. Slavers and smugglers would come after them. The station gang might have contacts off-world. Saras must have sensed his thoughts, because she placed a hand over his good shoulder. "We'll face them together," she said softly. "If you'll stay by my side." He met her gaze, seeing the same resolve and longing that mirrored his own. "I'm not going anywhere," he promised. By the time they reached the relative safety of open space, the adrenaline crash hit them both. Saras insisted on tending to his wound, leading him to the medical kit stashed in a compartment near the bunk. She helped him peel off his shirt, her hands gentle as she cleaned and dressed the graze. "You saved me more than once," she murmured, applying a bandage. "I'm sorry you got hurt." He studied her face, the slight frown of worry in her brow. "I'd do it again," he said, voice low. "I'm not used to letting people in. But you've changed that." A faint blush colored her cheeks. She ran her thumb tenderly over his bandaged shoulder, then wrapped her arms around his waist. He inhaled her scent, letting the closeness wash away the sting of pain. The relic hummed softly in the cargo hold, as though echoing the resonance between them. They lingered in that embrace, hearts still racing but for different reasons now. Eventually, Saras drew back, her filaments brushing his bare skin. "I can sense you're exhausted, but your mind is churning," she said. "The nightmares might come again if you don't rest properly. Would you let me help chase them away?" Her tone held both gentleness and desire. He nodded, pulling her into a deeper embrace. This time, the kiss they shared held the weight of everything they'd risked, the promise of what they might become. It was a slow, burning caress, laced with the electric thrill of possibility. He backed her toward the bunk, careful of his shoulder. She tugged him down beside her, cloak sliding off her shoulders. Their limbs tangled in the small space, breath mingling, bodies heating. She let out a soft moan, and he felt her scales shift against his skin, a sensation that sent sparks through his veins. "I want to join your dreams," she whispered against his ear, referencing the question she'd once asked. "Or at least change them, so they're not haunted anymore." He cupped her cheek, looking into those luminous eyes. "Then do it," he whispered back. "Be the reason I don't moan in pain but in something else, something good." A smile curved her lips. The night, or whatever passed for night in the vastness of space, stretched before them, ripe with the promise of shared intimacy and the slow burn of trust. They moved together carefully, exploring curves and edges, the differences in their anatomy that somehow complemented each other. In that quiet moment, wrapped in each other's arms, they forgot about the relic, the slavers, the danger beyond the hull. There was only the hush of breath, the pulse of hearts, and the heady thrill of forging a bond that neither had expected but both needed. They lay tangled together in the bunk's narrow confines, exchanging whispers that carried more weight than any vow. When his eyes finally slipped shut, she was there, filaments wrapped around him, guiding his mind away from the dark corners where nightmares lurked. And for the first time in a long, long while, he slept peacefully, lulled by the resonance of her presence and the promise that whatever came next, they would face it together. When they stirred again, it was to the ship's console beeping an urgent message. Alvis and Saras exchanged glances, a silent agreement that their moment of safety was over. The relic was secure, but they needed to figure out how to return it to her clan, or how to keep it from falling into hostile hands. They disentangled from each other with gentle reluctance, the warmth of their shared bed still clinging to their skin. Saras slipped on her cloak, filaments coiling around her shoulders as she moved to the cockpit. Alvis followed, flexing his bandaged shoulder to test its readiness for another inevitable fight. The console displayed a scrambled signal coming from somewhere off their starboard side. Alvis frowned, trying to interpret it. Saras peered over his shoulder. "It looks like a distress beacon," she murmured. "But it's not from my clan. Could it be a trap?" He shrugged, scanning the readout. "Could be. But it's on a civilian frequency. Might be worth investigating, or at least avoiding if it's trouble." She exhaled softly, her eyes flickering to the cargo hold where the relic sat nestled in protective casing. "I don't want to risk losing more time. But ignoring a distress call, is that something you can do easily?" Her gaze flickered over him, a knowing glint in her eyes. She'd seen how he rushed to help, how he threw himself into danger for her sake. He hesitated, torn between ensuring her relic's safety and the nagging sense of duty he felt. Before he could answer, the console beeped again, the signal intensifying. He dialed up the comm channel, static crackling before a faint voice emerged. "Any vessel within range, we are under attack by slaver ships, requesting immediate assistance." Alvis met Saras's gaze, tension coiling in the pit of his stomach. "Slavers," he said grimly. She paled, her filaments brightening. "It might be the same group that stole our relic," she said, voice laced with anger. "They have many victims. We can't just stand by, can we?" He shook his head. "No, we can't." She placed a hand on his arm, and he felt the comforting hum of her resonance. "Then let's see if we can help them," she said, steel in her voice. "And if it's a trap, we'll fight our way out." He nodded, steering the ship toward the beacon's coordinates. They were about to dive headlong into another confrontation, risking both their lives and the priceless relic they carried. But as he looked at Saras, her scales glinting with determination, her posture regal even under pressure, he felt a surge of belief that together, they could handle whatever came next. The ship soared across the moon's orbit, guided by the faint distress signal. As they closed in, sensor sweeps indicated a small civilian shuttle being pursued by two heavily armed vessels. The local star's glare lit the scene, reflecting off the hulls of the ships. Blaster fire arced through the void, rocking the shuttle as it tried to evade capture. Alvis's knuckles whitened on the controls. "We can't go head-to-head with those ships in a firefight," he said. "Our weapons are minimal. But maybe we can distract them long enough for the shuttle to escape." Saras nodded, sliding into the co-pilot's seat. She scanned the data, lips set in a tight line. "They're broadcasting a panic code. The shuttle must have refugees on board or something equally precious. That's how the slavers operate. They corner vulnerable ships, force them to surrender. If we can jam their systems, maybe we can buy the shuttle time to jump." Alvis quickly typed a few commands into the console. "I'll try a scramble on their targeting sensors. But we only get one shot before they realize what's happening." Saras placed her hand over his, adding her own alien codes gleaned from the wafer. "Use these frequency modulations," she suggested. "It might confuse their scanners briefly." He raised an eyebrow, impressed that she'd thought of it. "You're full of surprises," he said, half grinning despite the tension. She gave him a small, determined smile. "I've had to learn many things to survive." With the plan in place, he angled the ship into the fray. The two slaver vessels continued their onslaught, beams of energy hammering the shuttle's shields. Alvis keyed the scramble. Static surged across the comm, and for a moment, the slavers' weapons' fire wavered. "No!" he shouted. He gunned the engines, streaking past them in a feint that forced the slavers to refocus. One of them broke off to chase Alvis's ship, confused by the abrupt interference. "Shuttle!" Saras called into the comm. "Take this window and jump if you can. We'll cover you." The faint voice responded with gratitude and frantic relief. Meanwhile, Alvis juked the ship, weaving through blasts of plasma. The hull rattled with each near miss. "I can't keep this up long," he muttered, sweat trickling down his temple. The shuttle's engines flared bright, and in a burst of light, it vanished into faster-than-light travel, escaping the slavers' clutches. The pilot's last words crackled through the radio. "Whoever you are, thank you. We owe you our lives." Then there was only static. The slavers, realizing their prize had slipped away, redirected their wrath to Alvis's small vessel. "They're locking on us," Saras said, her tone taut with alarm. "We need to jump. Now." Alvis cursed, glancing at the NAV console. "The drive needs time to spool," he warned. "We'll have to hold them off or outrun them until it's ready." Saras's jaw tightened. She rushed to the relic in the cargo hold, returning with the data wafer that had once guided them to the station. "I might be able to overload it, create a feedback loop," she said breathlessly. "It could disrupt their systems again, but it'll fry our wafer in the process." He stared at her. "That wafer is your only link to your clan's relic code. Are you sure you want to risk it?" She spared a glance at the sealed container. "We already have the relic. If destroying the wafer lets us live to return it to my people, then that's more important." He nodded, admiration and gratitude flooding him. "Do it." She jammed the wafer into the console, typing a rapid sequence of commands. Sparks flew from the panel as conflicting energy surged through. The slavers' ships loomed in the viewport, weapons charging for a final strike. Then a bright pulse of static electricity rippled outward from Alvis's ship, enveloping the slavers in a crackling web. For several seconds both vessels wobbled, lights flickering. Alvis seized the opportunity, slamming the throttle forward. The engines roared, catapulting them out of range. "Spool's at 80%, he reported, voice strained. A few more tense heartbeats later, the jump drive's console turned green. "Punching it!" he shouted. With a surge, they crossed the threshold into faster-than-light, leaving the slavers behind in swirling starlight. When they emerged from jump space in the quiet black of a remote sector, both of them sagged in relief. The console smoked slightly, and Saras hurried to remove the ruined wafer. "It's destroyed," she confirmed, looking more relieved than upset. Alvis powered down the engines, letting the ship drift. His ears rang with the echoes of the fight. Saras sank into the co-pilot's chair, breathing heavily. He joined her, reaching out to squeeze her hand. We did it, he said, voice hushed. She nodded, tears glistening in the corners of her eyes. He reached up to brush them away gently. Hey, he murmured. It's okay. We're safe now. She let out a shaky laugh. Safe for the moment. But I'm just grateful. We saved people from being enslaved. We have the relic back. And we... She trailed off, letting the raw emotion speak for itself. He cupped her cheek, guided by a gentle compulsion to comfort her. She leaned into his hand, her scales warm and soft. And we have each other, he finished. She nodded, filaments glowing. The silence between them was electric, humming with unspoken promises. She twisted in her seat, swung a leg over his lap, and straddled him gently. He let out a soft gasp, but his hands moved to her hips, welcoming her closeness. She tangled her fingers in his hair, drawing him into a tender kiss. Their mouths lingered, exploring each other with the slow intensity born of relief and renewed passion. He savored the feel of her body against his, the way her unique physiology melded so seamlessly with his when they were skin to skin. She moaned softly, recalling the very question that had started everything: why did he moan in his sleep? Now she was discovering the many reasons he might moan while awake, reasons that had nothing to do with nightmares. He slipped his hands under the edge of her cloak, feeling the cool ridges of her scaled back. She arched toward him, pressing them closer. His breath caught at the sensation of her heartbeat thrumming against his chest, a sensual mirror of the resonance they'd shared. For a blissful span of minutes, they forgot the battered state of the ship, the dangers lurking in the galaxy. Their world shrank to the gentle friction of lips and tongues, the mutual exploration of newly discovered intimacy. Eventually, they broke apart, breathing heavily. She rested her forehead against his, filaments fanning around them. I want to learn all your ways of expressing, she whispered, referencing the human capacity for outward emotion that intrigued her so deeply. Every cry, every sigh, every moan that's not born of fear. He brushed a thumb over her lips, a shiver of anticipation rolling through him. I want to teach you, he murmured. And I want to learn yours, the subtle vibrations and the resonance you shared with me. Show me everything. She smiled, her eyes shining. There's so much we can share, she said, if we take the time to discover it. He nodded, sealing his agreement with another slow, molten kiss that left them both lightheaded. The hum of the ship's life support wrapped them in a cocoon of safety, the stars outside witnessing this fragile, fervent union of two wandering souls. Time blurred. Later, they found themselves lying entwined on the narrow bunk once more, the relic's gentle pulse resonating through the hull. She traced patterns on his chest, her filaments splayed over his arm. He stared at the metal ceiling, the faint grin on his face refusing to fade. Every muscle in his body felt deliciously heavy, as though they'd poured every ounce of tension into the moment of lovemaking. She rested her chin on his sternum, gazing up at him with luminous eyes. Where do we go from here? She asked softly. He stroked the back of her neck, thinking. Your clan, he said. We should return this relic to them, right? She nodded. Yes. But my people are scattered. Our homeworld is under blockade by a rival faction. We keep hidden outposts, traveling caravans. I'd planned to deliver the relic to one of our enclaves, but I lost the coordinates when the wafer was destroyed. He frowned, feeling her frustration as though it were his own. We'll find a way, he promised. There must be someone in the galaxy who can direct us, or old star charts we can decipher. We'll piece it together. She let out a relieved breath, pressing closer. And after that, what will you do? She asked, searching his face. He paused, realizing with a pang that he'd lived his life drifting from one mercenary job to another, no real purpose beyond survival. Honestly, I don't know, he admitted. But I'd rather figure it out with you by my side if you'll have me. Her scales brightened, a visual sign of emotion that melted his heart. She pressed a kiss to his chest. I want that, she whispered, voice trembling with sincerity. I never expected to find someone who'd help me carry my burdens, let alone someone who moaned in his sleep and made me want to join those moans with my own. A breathless laugh escaped him. You say it like it's a good thing, he teased. She nipped at his collarbone in playful reprimand. It is a good thing, she insisted, because it led me to discover you, to see how deep your heart goes. He felt a lump forming in his throat, unused to such earnest affection. He threaded his fingers through her filaments, gently guiding her lips to his. They kissed again, lingering in the sweetness of shared vulnerability. Then he pulled back, noticing the raw brightness in her gaze. Saras, I'm not always going to be this collected. I have a lot of baggage. You've helped calm my nightmares, but they might come back. And I'm not a hero, not really. I just can't stand to watch people suffer. Sometimes I don't know how to live any other way than rushing into danger. She cupped his jaw, eyes shimmering. Then let me stand with you when danger comes. Let me share that burden. He exhaled, heart overflowing with gratitude and growing affection. Deal, he murmured. They stayed like that for a while, exchanging soft touches and whispered confessions. Each moment felt precious, a fragile bloom of tenderness in a harsh galaxy. Eventually, Saras shifted. We should check the relic, she said. Make sure it's stable. Sometimes it can be volatile if displaced from its protective environment too long. Alvis nodded, helping her sit up. The reality of their mission returned to the forefront. He pulled on a pair of pants while she threw her cloak around her shoulders. Together, they approached the cargo hold. The relic's container emitted a faint luminescence, as if echoing the glow of her filaments. She knelt beside it, placing a palm on its surface. A shimmer of energy coursed through the container, resonating with her touch. She closed her eyes, focusing. Alvis felt a subtle vibration under his feet, as though the ship's deck plates were responding. When she opened her eyes, her face shone with relief. It's stable, she confirmed. Still intact. We just need a quiet, sacred place to open it properly and confirm the orb inside is undamaged. He glanced around the dingy cargo hold. This isn't exactly sacred, but it's quiet, he offered wryly. She laughed softly. I'd rather wait until we're safe from pursuit. The orb's power can be unpredictable if exposed in the wrong environment. Alvis nodded, stifling a yawn. Adrenaline had carried them this far, but now exhaustion tugged at him. So let's set a course away from the slaver's reach, find a safe port, and start gathering leads on your people's enclave. She smiled, her scales reflecting hope. Yes. That's our next step. They returned to the cockpit, working side by side to map out potential destinations. The quiet synergy they developed was a comfort, each gesture and glance filled with a growing sense of trust. Once the star charts were set and the ship was on autopilot, they settled back into their seats, letting the hum of the engines lull them. He reached out, threading his fingers with hers. She squeezed gently, filaments flickering in contentment. Alvis, she said, turning her gaze to him. When I first asked why you moan in your sleep, I had no idea it would lead here. I only knew that your voice called to me in the darkness of that station, that your pain felt important. Now I'm glad I listened. He smiled, a warmth blooming in his chest. I'm glad you did, too. You asked me earlier if I was frightened. I was. Not just of the station or the slavers, but of letting someone see the parts of me I usually hide. But I think I'm done hiding. She pressed his hand to her cheek, eyes drifting shut. I will stand beside you, no matter what nightmares return, she promised softly. He leaned over, capturing her lips in a tender kiss that carried his silent gratitude. They had a long journey ahead, fraught with unknown perils. The relic's return was far from guaranteed, and slavers or other enemies might yet track them. But together they had forged something powerful in the crucible of adversity, a fragile, radiant bond that flickered with possibility. In that stolen moment, alone in the cockpit against the vast backdrop of stars, they sealed an unspoken covenant. Their union was more than just physical desire, it was a merging of haunted dreams and luminous hope, a testament that even in a galaxy filled with betrayal and danger, two lonely souls could find solace and love in each other's arms. Despite the uncertain future, they embraced the promise of it, hearts steady and entwined, ready to face whatever cosmos lay ahead. And if, in the quiet nights to come, he ever moaned again, it would no longer be a cry of torment but a shared echo of pleasure and longing, one that she was more than willing to join, time and time again.